some things you see coming, some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. John from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
I'm Mark Crumpton with Bloomberg's First Word News. Supreme Court nominee Judge Amy Coney Barrett addressed a Senate panel today during the first day of her confirmation hearings. Barrett said she was humbled by, quote, this profound responsibility. She also said the Supreme Court must be independent and interpret the Constitution and the nation's laws, quote, as they were written. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham pushed back at criticism that his panel is rushing Barrett's confirmation through, saying the Senate is doing its constitutional duty. Hundreds of people gathered outside the Supreme Court today to protest Barrett's nomination. Senate Democrats described Judge Barrett as a threat to Americans' health care during the coronavirus pandemic. Barring a dramatic development, Republicans appear to have the votes to confirm Judge Barrett to a lifetime seat on the High Court. If she is confirmed quickly, she could be on the bench when it hears the latest challenge to the Affordable Care Act a week after the presidential election. 180 countries have now joined the World Health Organization-backed initiative to develop a coronavirus vaccine. Although the U.S. hasn't joined the $18 billion effort called COVAX, the WHO called the level of participation, quote, encouraging. Meantime, the agency's Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, urged countries not to pursue what he called herd immunity. He said today the vast majority of people have not yet been infected, and he said that questions remain about how long immunity lasts and what long-term effects of COVID-19 create. European Union officials have agreed to impose sanctions on Russian officials and organizations blamed for the poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Those suspected of being involved will have their assets frozen, and they will be banned from traveling in Europe. Navalny, a fierce critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin, fell ill in August during a domestic flight in Russia. Tests confirmed that he was poisoned by a Soviet-era nerve agent. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Hello. Welcome to another day of light trading. Hope you will enjoy what we are doing here.
Half of the gains, the point gains, are basically three companies right now, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. So something to keep an eye on. You're keeping an eye on right now what's going on in the oil space. Usually a pretty good tell on what's going on with regards to economic outlook. Right now, WTI crude dropping back below $39 a barrel, settling at $39.43. You're looking at $39.36 for the new session. Also saw a pretty steep sell-off in gasoline today. Some data coming out showing that gasoline demand falling in the most recent week. And keep an eye on natural gas. Natural natural gas right now trading at its highest level since at least March of 2019. A pretty big surge here, largely on the back of some cooler weather sweeping across the nation, giving some folks a little bit of optimism that natural gas prices may be underpinned, Taylor.
Yeah, and as you were talking about, Romaine, some of the economics, of course, we're in the middle of earnings season, really waiting to hear from some of the big banks to give us some guidance on what they're seeing on the ground. Wanted to pull up this chart here that is fascinating as we talk about the growth to value rotation. Well, certainly not today. Value and some of the bank stocks underperforming relative to the S&P 500 to the most on record. So from a ratio perspective, you're near the lowest that we have ever seen. Of course, there's a lot of concerns about loan losses, low interest rates, what that means for profitability, and then some of the economics behind this recovery. And for more, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Sonali Basak, who's been covering all of these banking stocks. And really, the loan losses so in focus last quarter. Is that to the focus this time?
It sure is, Taylor, because last time we checked in with the banks, we really thought from them it would be the worst that we've seen. And even though the loan losses that we're expecting in this coming quarter are not as bad as the second quarter, we're still adding potentially another $10 billion in loan losses to more than $50 billion booked in the first quarter from the big banks at the beginning of this year. So when we look at the coming years, Fitch Ratings doesn't believe we'll stop seeing these loan losses until the middle of next year. So it might be a while before we stop seeing this provisioning. The good news is the banks seem to be somewhat conservative, using about a 9% unemployment rate towards the end of this year. As we know right now, it's a little better than that, but there's still a lot of uncertainty baked into these numbers and a lot we're not seeing in these loan losses. For example, some pain we're seeing in the real estate sector and other areas of the economy.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting just to get really the sense of what we hear from the CEOs, what they're seeing, what they're feeling as we get an impasse in terms of stimulus coming from government and any further help for the US population out there. Talk to us a little bit about how much the banks are hurting about current monetary policy as well. Net interest margins, I'm sure, are going to be pretty painful.
Yeah, they're ever lower. It's certainly a problem. And if you look at the revenue growth estimates for the biggest banks, we're seeing a lot of pressure on Citi, JP Morgan, Bank of America, the ones with big consumer businesses. And how they react to the consumers in the time of need is the biggest question. How willing will they be to lend in the next 6 to 8 months when the economy needs it? We're not seeing a lot of pressure right now in charge-offs and these loans going bad, really, because we've seen that first wave of stimulus. But once that starts to wear off, that might make it a lot harder on the banks that don't have very big trading businesses, especially, to lean on.
What about deposits, Sonali? I mean, that was a big story in the most recent quarter.
Right, the deposits are a good story, right? People have been trying to save for a rainy day, but again, right now, everything else that's happening in the banking sector is not offsetting, Romaine, what you're seeing in terms of potential losses. I would say there is no other real story right now. If they can't get all of that under control, then how do they offset any of the gains from the other businesses?
We'll have to see how volatility has been their friend and potentially outlook for the consumer. Sonali Basak, great to have you ahead of these important numbers this week. We thank you. Coming up, we'll hear from World Bank President David Malpass on how the pandemic could add to economic inequality, something we talk about a lot on this show. This is Bloomberg.
Tratamos de mantener el nivel de seguridad. Te recuerdo que nuestro objetivo prioritario es evitar o minimizar el riesgo de contagio COVID en la Antártida para mantener el continente limpio de COVID.
100% increase in daily call volume, no matter what. We keep on, so you can keep on.
Bank's been around for over 90 years. World-class, huge talent, perfectly complementary businesses. There'll be very little dislocation, high growth, some great businesses. So this was a
And Roz, of course, the U.S. stimulus package, very important ahead of the U.S. election. And we're now hearing that President Trump has been cleared by his doctor. In fact, the president himself pitching his post-infection immunity as an advantage against Joe Biden. What do we know about his schedule now?
Well, he's hitting the trail as of tomorrow. And according to reports, he'd like to do a campaign event every day between now and November 3. So far, we know about him going to Florida, to Pennsylvania, and to Iowa. It's interesting to see him defend states like Iowa, which he won by 9 points in 2016. You would think that's an easy pickup for the Republican candidate, but he's going there this week. Trump is down about 10 points to Joe Biden nationally. Things are much tighter in some of these battleground states. And, as he gets out onto the road, he gets a lot of earned media in local markets. So, that's definitely his plan to try to narrow the gap.
And Roz, just before we go, of course, the presidential debate has been scrapped for this week. So what are we expecting? Because now we're hearing that the president may want a sort of town hall meeting or something.
Well, it sounds like Joe Biden would like to have the town hall meeting where he takes questions directly from voters. My impression with President Trump is that he may have, yet another one of his signature campaign rallies, but he might also do some kind of event where he's closer to the voters. So it's a very interesting turn of events about the debate. And Trump, having been cleared by his doctor, would once again say to Joe Biden, "Come out and debate me, face to face." But I don't think that's really in the candidate's hands at this point. So, but yes, watch out for some scheduling announcements.
What does this data tell us about President Trump's positioning heading into the final weeks of the campaign? We know he's eager, and he will be getting back out to his campaign trail as soon as today. He'll be heading to Florida.
Well, that's right, Anne-Marie. That Washington Post ABC News poll certainly wasn't good news for Trump, though he, of course, was quick to write it off as inaccurate. I think we all still have fresh memories of election night 2016, and I remember having pollsters on the phone just devastated, feeling that they hadn't calculated correctly the mood of the country. So, of course, everyone's still pretty cautious about getting an accurate read on the situation. But what we can say at this point is that we would expect to see a narrowing in the polls into the final weeks, as is typically the pattern. And it's good news for former Vice President Biden that his lead nationally at least appears to be actually solidifying and so far not allowing Trump to close that gap. But of course, there are so many caveats here, and the two big ones I would point out are the battleground states and turnout. Of course, a handful of key swing states here could be the deal breakers for a Biden win, and the state polls are much closer, even in that Washington Post ABC News poll, and less clear in the leading candidate than at the national level. So one in particular I would watch, of course, is Pennsylvania, which Trump has been making a hard run at. You mentioned Florida, he's headed to today. These are both key states. And secondly, it's always about turnout. We do know that millions are already sending in mail-in ballots, but this is an election unlike any other. And even for polls that measure likely voters, it's hard to say whether those responding will show up on Election Day, particularly given the strange circumstances this year.
Michelle, now that he's had his first public appearance since he was treated for COVID, what issues will you be watching for Trump to prioritize in these final weeks?
Well, the COVID diagnosis certainly interrupted one that he had been trying to push very hard, and that is law and order. It certainly appeals to his core supporters. So we could expect to hear him kind of get back to that. But he won't be able to avoid all the economy-related issues right now. Of course, front and center, and we've been talking about this on the program, is the stimulus showdown. On that, we can expect to see, Trump try to continue to stay in the driver's seat in negotiations. It's sort of vintage Trump to sort of blow up the deal, only to be the one to say that he wants to rescue it again. So we've seen him take a similar tack in other negotiations. Kim Jong-un comes to mind, for instance, where he'll just try to control the negotiation. So we'll see this jockeying back and forth between the Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi, and then, of course, the White House and Republicans in Congress. But so we're going to see that stimulus back and forth. Whether or not we see it before election or after in terms of a package is very critical for the economy. It might not play as much into election politics in terms of, feeling each side feeling that they'll need to do that. But lastly, we'll also see this sort of tug of war between the Trump and Biden camps on whether Americans should view the economy as having moved past COVID with strong fundamentals, which is what the Trump team would favor, or just hobbling along and in need of a leader with a far different style on how to manage the pandemic. So, you'll hear the Biden camp continue to link the economy's state with the COVID response and the lack thereof in their view. So for those undecided voters still left, October 29th will bring us a first look at the third quarter GDP data and perhaps a little bit more information there and elsewhere to take a view on that.
Speaking of those undecided voters, a lot of them are independents, Michelle. And yesterday I went through the Washington Post ABC poll, and we see really a stark contrast to where Trump was versus Clinton in the independents, where Clinton actually trailed, where he is versus Biden. I mean, look at that versus Biden, 52-40 for the independents. Is this where either candidate is going to win?
Well, I think that's certainly very key, Anne-Marie. I mean, it's going to be one of the big factors is independents and moderates, I mean, who might be swayed one way or the other and tend to vote on issues that might be unpredictable. Maybe they're one-issue voters or they're like seven-issue voters, and it's hard for them to decide the weights of all those issues right now. So, yeah, certainly that's going to be key, and I did notice that as well, that the independents seem to be shifting more toward Biden in this case, which is good news for his camp because that is a key constituency that, as you know, was lost to Trump in 2016.
Stephanie, to be blunt, this is what the president loves. He's healed. He's got a message. He's doing Fox. He's going to go out and rally. Is it going to work? Is it a 2016 redux?
He's so behind in the polls that he's got to stage something to change the nature of the conversation and get back into the debate. And the fact that he has refused to participate in this virtual debate, the terms of which Biden has agreed to, and he has refused, saying he doesn't want to do a virtual debate. Now it looks like ABC is going to do a town hall with Biden alone. At least that's what they've announced.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Whether or not, Trump will change his mind, I think most people think it's a risk for him not to participate in this debate when he's so behind in the polls. It gives the Democrats the opportunity to say that he is perhaps too scared to debate, but he's the one who needs it. He's the one that's behind.
But within the clock and getting to October 15th, if we presume there was a third debate, he's going to have 5, 7, 10 days to regroup for a third debate that may not be virtual, right?
Right. So I think that the next debate after, and the third final debate is on the 29th of October, scheduled to be. And, that doesn't give him much time before the election, on November 3rd to catch up. And if you look at the polls, I mean, he's behind in a number of swing states, if you believe the polls as they stand. And he's pulling out all sorts of, last-minute stops, releasing these Russia documents, attacking his members of his own cabinet, including Attorney General William Barr for not prosecuting Obama and Biden for, allegedly monitoring spying on his election campaign in 2016. So he's kind of grasping at straws, looking for something that could perhaps change the course of this election in the final stretch.
What would change the course of the election, Stephanie? Is it just a matter of who shows up to vote on November 3rd?
Well, if you remember, at this time in the 2016 election was the Access Hollywood tape that was released, which many thought was he'd never recover from. And then after that, there was the whole issue around Hillary Clinton's emails, which did seem to change the nature of the debate. He seems to be trying to stage a repeat of that, but I think it's going to be very hard for him to do that. People are already voting. There's a lot more early voting going on now. So I think it'll be much harder to try to change the course of the debate this late. And he seems to be, harming himself by some of the comments that he's making on coronavirus, saying that it's not that bad, he's got through it, on the same day that 1,000 people in the U.S. died from COVID. It strikes me as, tone deaf, given what's going on in the country. Likewise, with the, refusal to kind of push ahead with the stimulus talks, why would you, stop the chance to provide, stimulus to the country right before voters go to the polls? It doesn't make any sense.
As the 2020 presidential race comes down to the wire, the outcome may hinge on a few key states, which could swing either red or blue. Coming up, we'll check in with Arizona.
There's a good chance that it is probably turning a little purple.
We'll get perspective from North Carolina.
We are a more Republican state than we were 40 years ago, but less conservative.
And we'll hear from a bellwether in presidential politics, Ohio.
When you look at the numbers in Ohio, we have already narrowed that gap.
This is a special edition of Balance of Power's look at election 2020. I'm David Weston. Today, we look at 3 critical swing states that could help decide who occupies the Oval Office in next January. We start with Arizona, a once solidly Republican state that is now more of a toss-up. Arizona has 11 electoral votes, and polls show a tight race as former Vice President Joe Biden hopes to become the first Democrat to win the Grand Canyon state since Bill Clinton did back in 1996. For an overview, we spoke to Bloomberg contributor Rick Davis, who ran the 2008 presidential campaign of the late Arizona Senator John McCain.
4 years ago in 2016, it was not a swing state. So it's one of those that have moved into the swing column primarily because it changes both demographically in the state, but also ideologically. Demographically, I think, the increase in Hispanic population have moved it a little bit closer to the Democratic column. Hispanics make up almost a third of the voting population now. And ideologically, in 2016, Trump won white suburban voters in Maricopa County, the largest county in the state, what really decides the outcome in states. And in 2018, those same suburban voters fled the Republican Party, causing Martha McSally, running for election to the Senate, to lose a Republican. So it's going to be an interesting ride there, but it's definitely a swing state this year.
So as you say, Maricopa County, as I understand it, you know better than I, really determines the state largely. It's a really big county and a large portion of the voting populace. What has changed 2016 to 2018? Has the Democratic nature of Maricopa counties changed? Is it more heterogeneous than it was before? Is it they've changed their attitude toward things like immigration?
Well, Maricopa has been changing for a long time. It is one of those counties. It's the city of Phoenix is in Maricopa County that has grown at an enormous rate. It's been one of the top 5 fastest growing counties in the United States for the last 15 years, and is one of the top 5 of the largest counties in America. So it is a complex political beast. I would say what is starting to change is the Republican lock in the suburbs. In the past, we've been able to win the state by winning Maricopa. And if we are not able to hold on to especially white women suburban voters in Maricopa County, we can't win the election.
For a perspective on what it takes to win statewide office in Arizona, we spoke to someone who's done it, former Republican Governor Jan Brewer. She admits the state is changing, but she hopes it hangs on to its conservative roots.
There's a good chance that it is probably turning a little purple here in Arizona, which is very distressful to us Republicans. But the bottom line is that we've had a lot of people moving in out of California and other places coming to the great state of Arizona. So our demographics have really changed. I think that we have to take that all into consideration when we're out there spreading our message about conservatism, because, you know, Arizona's always been a very conservative state. So I think that it probably will remain conservative. I am hopeful of that, but we've got big races on our hands. And I know that the election for the president is tightening, and for our United States Senate, that race is very frightful. And we've got to really get out there and spread our message.
For a Democratic perspective on the issues that matter to Arizonans, we spoke to Representative Tom O'Halloran, a Democrat who represents the 1st District, which includes much of the eastern part of the state and Flagstaff.
This state's going to be looking at a lot what other states are going to look at: the economy, the COVID issues, issues related to natural resources because of the size of the state and the amount of. In my district, I have all or parts of 6 national forests and the Grand Canyon and other forested areas, and we're going to be looking at that. Water is a big issue in the southwestern United States, and healthcare. You know, it's going to be a race that I think is trending towards the same direction it did in 18, but we still have a long ways to go.
This election year, it won't just be about getting people to come out and vote for a given candidate. Much may also turn on whose votes get counted and how. We spoke to Secretary of State Katie Hobbs to find out how Arizona will run its elections in a year when a pandemic is likely to drive record levels of absentee ballots.
We are in really good shape in terms of vote by mail. In 2018, 78% of our voters voted that way. And so in terms of having the processes in place, the infrastructure, and making sure that that vote by mail is very secure in Arizona, we are there and ready to and able to handle the increases that we expect for this election.
Could you give us a sense at this point, Madam Secretary, of how many requests there have been filed so far for mail-in ballots? Does it give you any indication whether it's going to be a larger number that you have to end up counting or not?
Well, prior to this election, we had 75% of our voters on the permanent early voter list, but voters can also request a one-time early ballot. So we don't ever know until, really close to the election how many ballots are actually going out in the mail. Voters can request that up until October 23rd. So we expect an increase. We saw 88% of voters vote early in the primary election that was just held, and that's the amount that we're gearing up for in this election.
So maybe October 23rd, we'll have a little better sense of how many people have requested this. As I understand it, you can't start counting until Election Day. Is that right?
No, not in Arizona. The county recorders immediately begin processing those ballots once they start receiving them back in the mail. They get mailed out on October 7th, and they can start receiving them right away. And they start processing them in terms of verifying the signature on the affidavit, the voter's signature. That's how identity is verified. And then those ballots are separated from the envelope, ready to be processed and tabulated. And we can start tabulation 14 days before the election.
Arizona's had a little bit of history with voting. In fact, there was a Ninth Circuit decision, as I understand it, just this year about the Voting Rights Act, and some of the laws had been passed to sort of discourage, the court found at least, some people from voting. Is that going to make a difference in this election this year?
Well, that law that the Ninth Circuit overturned is still on the books. It's been appealed. The overturn has been appealed to the Supreme Court, and there's a stay right now. So we anticipate that law, which has been in effect for a couple elections now, will still be in effect, and so won't really impact. There's a couple other pending court decisions that we're waiting on to see how they might impact this year's election.
That was Arizona's Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, wrapping up our look at the swing state of Arizona. Up next, we head to another state that's seen massive population growth and a large influx of new business, making it one of the most contested states in the nation, North Carolina.
We are a purple state with a very slight tint to red.
This is Bloomberg. I'm David Weston. This is a special edition of Balance of Power, looking at 3 key swing states in this year's election. We turn now to North Carolina. The Tar Heel state has 15 electoral votes and was carried by President Trump in 2016. It's voted for a Democrat for president only one time in the last 10 elections. Polling averages put President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden nearly dead even. J. Michael Bitzer, politics professor at Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina, sets the stage.
We are a purple state with a very slight tint to red. We're center lean right, but it's all dependent upon who shows up. And what has happened here in North Carolina after 2008 and particularly 2010 is that North Carolinians have basically sorted themselves into the respective partisan camps. You know, in 2004, George W. Bush won this state by 13 percentage points, and the Democratic governor who was running for re-election also won by 13 percentage points. That day of North Carolinians splitting their tickets has now shrunk to probably 3 to 5% of the electorate. Most North Carolinians have their minds made up going into November 3rd.
Longtime North Carolina members of Congress agree with that assessment. Here's the take from 2 members, Democrat David Price from the Triangle, which is Raleigh-Durham, and Republican Patrick McHenry from the Charlotte area.
We've usually referred to North Carolina as a center-right state, but I don't know. It looks center to me. Maybe that's the way to put it. We have a landmark Senate race where our candidate Cal Cunningham has steadily shown a small lead. Biden is showing a small lead over Trump. Our governor, who's also up for re-election, is showing a quite large lead over his opponent. And then the question also is, I guess, what about the special circumstances of this election? You know, we have shown in the past that Democrats can win North Carolina, like Barack Obama did in 2008. But usually it has the tip the other way. This time it looks like it it's just as close as it could be. But I think we're really living up to our swing state role, and our side's hopeful because there are a lot of hopeful signs.
North Carolina is a diverse state. We have 5 media markets fully contained within the state, 7 media markets total. It is a substantial and large geographic state and a substantial population. We have a lot of folks that have come in through the Northeast and the Midwest to come and work in the Triangle and in Charlotte, both with tech and pharmaceuticals in the Triangle and with banking in Charlotte. And as a result, we are a more Republican state than we were 40 years ago, but less conservative, more of a moderate state. So the tale of Raleigh and Charlotte that's different than the suburbs and exurbs of that, much less far western North Carolina and eastern North Carolina are far more conservative. And so it is a narrow run state politically. And we have very, very hard-fought elections to control the state legislature, the governorship, and re-elect Senator Tillis and the president. So it is quite a state, and it's going to be quite interesting and expensive over the coming days, that's for sure.
As for how they'll count the votes in North Carolina this year and when we'll know the results, here's Damon Circosta. He's chair of the State Board of Elections.
Well, so the good news in North Carolina is we start doing everything to authenticate your ballot if it's absentee vote by mail 5 weeks ahead of the election. So every week, Board of Elections members in the counties get together in a bipartisan fashion, make sure that all these ballots that are coming into us are authenticated and ready to go. We will then do everything to prepare them for tabulation and then tabulate them on election day. So in North Carolina on election day, you'll see the vast majority of votes already tabulated. What won't be tabulated is people who are sending in their absentee vote by mail late, any provisional votes, and those will come in over the corresponding days after the election. You have to remember, we do not call the election on election night. That's usually you folks in the media. What we do is we begin our process that then goes to county canvass, which is 10 days after the election, and then ultimately to us to certify in early December.
North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein is confident there will be minimal issues with the voting process.
we have very professional staffs at the county and state level. People can vote by mail. We were the first state in the country to send out absentee ballots. And in fact, we've had more than 200,000 ballots accepted, including mine. I'm pretty excited. And more than 1 million North Carolinians have already requested a mail-in ballot. But we also have 17 days of early voting, including 2 weekends and Election Day. So if people prefer to go in person, they can do that as well. They just need to know that it will be safe, it will be easy, and their vote will be secure.
Are you 100% certain that under your approach for fixing these ballots or curing these ballots, it will not lead to any voter fraud? Because that's what the President of the United States is worried about.
Yeah, the worries are 100% overblown. I am not worried, and I'll explain why. Look, a Republican, a U.S. federal court judge appointed by George W. Bush, President Bush, ordered the state to come up with a cure process because we've never had mail-in voting like we're seeing right now. It's only ever been a few percentage of the population that has done absentee mail-in voting. This time we're expecting 30 or 40% of the electorate to do it. And there's a few people, about 3 or 4 or 5%, who make a mistake. They don't sign the ballot in the right place, or the witness doesn't sign in the right place, or the witness doesn't include the address. And so this federal judge ordered the State Board of Elections to come up with a cure process. And that's all we have done, is to bring effect to this federal court order to make sure that when someone sends in a ballot and they made a mistake, that the State Board of Election or the County Board of Election reaches out to them and says, you made a mistake, will you cure it? And here's the form that you have to send back in to make that so.
North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein finishing our look at the key state of North Carolina. Up next, we head to Ohio, a state that has become the bellwether for picking presidents and is also bracing for scrutiny over its process at the polls.
We're recruiting poll workers. We're making sure that our boards of elections are ready for the record high volumes of absentee votes they're going to get.
This is Bloomberg. I'm David Weston. This is a special edition of Balance of Power, looking at 3 key swing states in this year's election. Finally, we turn to Ohio. The Buckeye State has 18 electoral votes and is perhaps the ultimate presidential bellwether, having voted for the winner in every single election since Lyndon Johnson's landslide back in 1964. Kyle Kondik, editor of Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center of Politics, wrote a book on Ohio's presidential politics and talked about why the suburbs of cities like Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus could be the key this year.
There's been a lot of reporting and indications from operatives on both sides that the president's numbers in suburban areas are just a lot weaker than they were 4 years ago, which again is something you hear about and see in polling in other states. So that's important for Biden. I also think that, Trump won the state by 8 points, so you got to make up a lot of ground to flip the state if you're Biden. And so I think it's also going to be important for Biden to at least not get blown out so badly in the Appalachian parts of Ohio, in the eastern part of the state. And I also am really curious to see what happens in the Youngstown area, which was kind of historically kind of blue-collar Democratic, and the president did very well there for a Republican. Can he do even better? Does he stay the same? Is there some erosion there? I think Biden needs there to be some erosion to make the math work statewide.
We spoke to 2 Ohio members of Congress who both represent parts of a major city and the suburbs. Democrat Joyce Beatty of Cleveland and Republican Steve Chabot of Cincinnati. Here are their thoughts on the state of the race.
When we look at what much of the polling is saying, what people are saying when they are voting early, because they want to make sure that we get a president who stands up and speaks up for the people. And of course, that's Joe Biden. When you look at the numbers in Ohio, we have already narrowed that gap. As a matter of fact, just a week ago, it was even money between Joe and President Trump. And now when you look at it, Joe Biden has done an incredible job of getting the message out and being about the people. And each day, something new comes out about this president that doesn't surprise many of us. But when we look at Ohio, when we look at my congressional district, many of the polls are telling us that Joe Biden is doing better than Hillary was doing at the same time in Ohio. So that's good for us. And we in Ohio, we're tired of Trump's endless tweets. We're tired of his uneven temper. We're tired of all of his fake news.
The president won the state last time. It's closer this time. I think he's going to carry the state. And it's obviously a very important state. They say, as goes Ohio, goes the nation, and that's been true most of the time over the year. We're trying to get beyond the COVID. We're trying to defeat it. We want to get a vaccine as soon as possible. Our governor, Mike DeWine, has been very aggressive in doing what was necessary to get the COVID under control and to make sure people are healthy. We're opening the schools and businesses. We're trying to do it in as safe a manner as possible because we want the economy to get back roaring again and get people back to work. So we're optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but we got a lot of work to do yet.
So one of the things that people who follow politics focus on are the suburbs. And let's talk about Cincinnati, a city you know well, having been born and grown up there. Talk about the suburbs and the president's appeal versus former Vice President Biden's appeal in the suburbs this time, because it's thought maybe it's moved a bit toward the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Well, the pollsters seem to say that, but we haven't had the election yet, and I think on Election Day we'll know the truth. And my feeling is people are concerned. They're concerned whether they're in urban areas, whether they're in the suburbs or in more rural areas. And I think they're looking at both the candidates. They're looking at the debate the other night, to the extent it was a debate, and they're looking at the records. And I think both candidates need to get everything out there, let the public make that decision. They usually get it right, and I usually agree with the decision they make. We'll see this time. I'm focused on my race also. We have a tough race, as we always do. I have most of the city of Cincinnati, and for a Republican, that makes it a little tougher. But it's an honor to represent the people of my district, and I'm determined to do it to the best of my ability.
Ohio is trying to make it easier for residents to vote this year, offering both absentee and early voting options, as explained by Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who joined us from Columbus.
The law says you can wait as late as the Saturday before the election. That is a very bad idea. Effectively, we're telling voters do not wait past the 27th of October just to allow for the logistics. But really, there's no reason to wait. If you didn't get the form that we mailed you, you can print your own at voteohio.gov, or you can even go there and get instructions for how to make your own just using a plain blank piece of notebook paper. And so that's something that Ohioans should do right now. And then if you're going to mail in your ballot, don't delay either. We want you to get that back as soon as you can. Those are going to start going out October 6th. As soon as you get it, you should fill it out and mail it back to your county board of elections. And in Ohio, you can track your ballot by going to voteohio.gov and making sure that the board of elections has received it. Now, the deadline is Monday, November 2nd. As long as it's postmarked by Monday, November 2nd, it has 10 days to arrive at the Board of Elections. David, one other important deadline that I want to mention is the voter registration deadline. Ohio's Constitution says got to be registered to vote 30 days before the election. That means this Monday, October 5th, is the final day to get registered to vote. I've got all the boards of elections in the state staying open late till 9 p.m. But of course, you can do it online at voteohio.gov, and it's more convenient than ever. Ohioans should check their registration and make sure it's up to date.
So you say 2 million so far possible mail-in ballots. When do you start counting them? How long will it take before we know what they are?
So the good news here in Ohio is that we can start to process them immediately. What that means is that once the Board of Elections receives it, they can cut it open, verify your identity, check your signature, flatten it out. And sometimes people take for granted they have to be flattened out so they can go through the scanner. And then as soon as the polls close at 7:30 on election night, we can begin tabulating them. And so really the first results that we start to get in Ohio are those results from the early and absentee votes. In some states, they can't even start cutting them open until Election Day. And so thankfully in Ohio, we'll be ahead of the curve on that.
So there's been a lot of litigation around the country. We've seen already. Some people say it's over 245 lawsuits filed already on this election. How are you doing in Ohio? Is there much contentiousness over this?
You know, unfortunately, it's become just something that we have to expect. Some of these come with maybe a certain partisan motivation behind them. That's unfortunate. Some of these lawsuits that people file just 5-6 weeks before a presidential election, of course, cause concern. Our lawyers are working hard on that, but I'm not getting distracted by any of that. Our eyes on the ball and the work that we have to do. We're recruiting poll workers. We're making sure that our boards of elections are ready for the record high volumes of absentee votes they're going to get, and we're getting accurate information out to Ohio voters. And so, as much as that legal process has to play itself out, that's not distracting us.
That does it for this special look at some of the key swing states in the 2020 presidential election. We'll have more coverage on Balance of Power weekdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, including a look at Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I'm David Weston. This is Bloomberg.
Andrew, I've never asked this question in the pandemic, and I guess it speaks to India and poorer countries. Fold nutrition into recovery of a virus-infected patient. Tell me, I mean, we're all fat and happy in America as a general statement. Fold in the importance of nutrition within a pandemic.
Well, good health is one of the factors that really drives the differences that we see in terms of disease severity and disease prevalences across different areas. A lot more factors play into it, but if we're going to focus on nutrition, being fat in America is probably not a good thing these days when it comes to COVID-19 because of the more severe diseases that are there. The converse is true too. Malnutrition, poor diets, those can make one more susceptible to infectious diseases, sometimes just in terms of being infectable, but sometimes in terms of disease severity instead. And again, that's one of the driving factors. These socioeconomic factors are really important factors when looking at a disease from a regional, from a national perspective, because they may be driving those differences that we're seeing in terms of how a disease presents in one country versus another.
Andrew, what can you tell us, and good morning from London, what can you tell us about the president's recovery?
Yeah, so, the president had a really fantastic group of doctors around him. He was given a course of therapy, which is a little bit untested. The Regeneron antibody and the remdesivir given early are both things that on paper are exactly what you should be doing. Those target the virus and should be given earlier in an infection. His use of dexamethasone a little bit later was a little bit interesting because it's usually reserved for more severe cases of disease, and that's because we usually want to give dexamethasone when the virus has already been somewhat controlled and it's your immune response that's driving the disease that's present. It worked out. The president recovered well, but the important thing to know is this is what we call an N=1 case. We need to have more clinical trials that show that this course of treatment or similar types of treatments really do work, and that's important to go forward, and that's why we have clinical trials for vaccines, but also for treatments.
Andrew, I mean, the president wants to get back to work. He wants to go back campaigning. One would presume that means he's no longer infectious. Is it a shorter amount of time than we thought someone is infectious when you get the disease?
So usually it's between 10 to 14 days after symptom onset that one feels like you're actually going to be not infectious anymore. And so I think that is the period of time that he's getting to right now. He'll also have a lot of other tests that measure his virus load, meaning that we'll be looking at how much virus is in his system and using that as a secondary confirmation that he's no longer infectious. So, he's approaching that phase where he should be able to resume all of his duties per what his doctors have said. I think a bigger issue, though, that you see from the debate, that you see from the Supreme Court nominee announcement, is there has to be a better sense of responsibility, to be honest, in terms of making sure the public health and the social interaction interventions are in place to limit the spread of the virus in the White House and in this staff. You can't rely on one thing like testing to make you safe. You have to have the testing, the social distancing, the mask wearing, all of those things in place. And that has to be demonstrated by the White House staff that is being done in an appropriate manner to prevent widespread movement of this virus through that staff.
So, Andrew, if we look at the case in point of the White House, are there more people in the U.S. that will likely, do and practice some of the protocols, the social distancing, the mask wearing, because they see what happens at the White House? Or is because the president is now okay, people will actually ignore some of the advice that scientists give?
I would like to think it's the former, because this really was an example of how relying on one thing, testing alone, leaves you vulnerable, and it allows the virus in to be able to spread. We're very fortunate that most of the cases involved in the White House were mild to moderate cases, that we didn't have any very severe cases of disease. But that's not the case in many scenarios. Again, the White House staff tends to be a little bit younger in terms of their average age. If this happened in a place where there was a significantly older population, we could have had some very severe disease cases come out of this. So the important thing is stop transmission cycles, be proactive, make sure that you are limiting the types of situations that the virus can spread in, because that's going to reduce the burden in our country in general, and that's the real goal that we're going after.
Andrew, talk to me about some of the FDA guidelines in accepting vaccines and whether that will go a long way in making sure that people want the vaccine when it's safe to have it.
Yeah, so, let's start by saying the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine effort has been a tremendous scientific and clinical endeavor. We've gotten so far in terms of bringing candidate vaccines that look good in early studies to the cusp of being able to be used in a population. But we're not over the finish line yet. We need to have the large-scale phase 3 clinical trials that are done to make sure that we have safety and efficacy of the vaccines well characterized, and we know going in what those two factors are going to be. It's also a matter of public trust. The fact that scientifically this vaccine has been developed so quickly may confer some sense to the population that things have been done too quickly, that maybe corners have been cut. And I think this is now the chance that the scientific, the clinical community, the pharmaceutical community can really stand up and make the case that they have developed a safe and efficacious vaccine. We're going to need a little bit more time for that, though, because the safety data, the efficacy data just takes time before you can accumulate the number of cases in your control groups to really show that the vaccine works. So this is a great thing. It's not going to slow down distribution of the vaccine by a tremendous amount, but it will make us more sure of exactly what the vaccine is, what its benefits are, and I think that's good for the public trust.
If we're still in the first wave of the coronavirus pandemic here in the U.S. and we still have some people debating the effectiveness of masks, I really can't help but be super scared about the winter. What will that look like? Are we headed for just inevitable lockdowns now?
That's right. So we are on our way to a third peak. We never left the first wave. We never came back to baseline. Europe is now surging to a second peak. And, it's really remarkable because we need to be able to control this epidemic today and not wait for a potential vaccine or any other thing that is going to come out, in the horizon. Public health really begins with each individual. And it doesn't bode well for us that we're headed into the winter in the Northern Hemisphere and with this number of cases on the rise. I call it the Swiss cheese analogy, where we need to be layering all these public health measures to be able to slow this down.
And when it comes to the layering of these public health measures, where would the leadership come from? Because we just heard last week from the world's top medical journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, and here's what they had to say. Instead of relying on expertise, the administration has turned to uninformed opinion leaders and charlatans who obscure the truth and facilitate the promulgation of outright lies. And remember, this is the first time that this journal has ever condemned or supported a political candidate. So when it comes to really dealing with this pandemic going into the winter, who do we trust? Is it the federal government that's going to take the leadership, or is it just the science out there and the scientists?
Yeah, that was a very powerful statement by the New England Journal of Medicine. Well, we know today that countries that have done better are countries that had very strong political leadership, that had a plan and they executed against the plan. And importantly, they had very clear fact-based, science-based communications to the public. It's highly unusual for a public to be so polarized around a common threat. And clear communications that are fact-based really help people act in unison. So I fear that the polarization that we face today, at least in the United States, really has been very detrimental to our ability to control the pandemic. And we can just compare our numbers, for example, to the numbers of a country like South Korea, which detected their initial cases within a day of each other. And the numbers really speak volumes. We're talking about South Korea with a population of 52 million, about 24,000 cases and 430 deaths. Whereas the U.S., with a population of about 330 million, we are facing 7.7 million cases and 210,000 deaths. The numbers speak volumes. Communications are clear, and I hope that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, will be able to, it's imperative they do, have a voice in going forward. It's not too late. We need to be able to get to the other side. It's not too late. And we cannot, a vaccine is something that we all hope for. Things are going very well. It's going to be a major asset to have safe and effective vaccines that are accessible, that are trusted. But they're, again, one measure among many that must be taken to be able to turn this around.
And of course, the confusion and conflict when it comes to best medical and scientific advice unusually goes all the way to the very top in the US, right? With President Trump's recent infection and proposed purported recovery, I should say. How dangerous is it that the president is placing so much faith and hype around some of these very experimental drugs? I mean, he keeps going on and on about Regeneron and talking about how he now has immunity. Is this really dangerous, that this is a message that he's putting out to the general public?
Look, we lost a lot of time to now. So a lot of trials that could have been done to be able to establish definitively what works, what helps, were not undertaken. It's been very difficult to enroll patients in the clinical trials because, there's always a promise of a miracle cure around the corner. And that has really challenged the scientific community. Regeneron has very, very promising data from early studies, as does Lilly. There are the monoclonal antibodies. So they produced a monoclonal antibody as a cocktail that basically it's an engineered antibody that targets the virus in a very potent and powerful way. It looks like it can be a very promising therapeutic, especially for some individuals that for whatever reason, they have a challenge in mounting their own immune response, and if given early. But we still have much to learn about these therapies. Who does it benefit? When does it benefit? What's the timing of administration? And by no means, this is a done deal. So we need to let the scientific process move, the way it always does, but of course with great urgency. Nobody will disagree that it needs to be done with great urgency. And that's the point of, the companies working hand in glove with the FDA or the regulatory agencies to be able to expedite the process. But we can't jump to conclusions before we have the data.
And you, of course, headed up the Medical and Biodefense Preparedness Team under the National Security Council before, of course, that was disbanded by John Bolton. In terms of future preparedness, we know that pandemics will come around again. What needs to be done now to make sure that any future healthcare crises can be handled in a more effective way?
Oh, my goodness, there's so much that needs to be done. And I think this really characterized the importance of having, a coordinated leadership at the White House level with expertise that needs to bring the whole of government together. It's also important to be able to focus on the fundamentals of epidemic preparedness. We have the testing capability. Diagnostic tests are so critical. We have a national capability that has not been really coordinated and taken advantage of. I know the comparison is with Little League, soccer team of people doing their own thing versus a professional team. We need to be able to leverage the resources we have in a coordinated way. We need to be able to do contact tracing. We need to be able to understand where disease is happening, so that data collection. And again, the success story really so far has been on vaccines, the rapid development vaccines, but everything else really, there's a lot to be desired, leaves a lot to be desired. And we can't forget that the United States has a critical role to play internationally. And we need to be able to have a strong voice within the State Department to help us work internationally with our allies, with World Health Organization, because nothing really supplants U.S. leadership, not only because of the resources, but the experience and the technical abilities that we bring to the table. It's essential. And I hope that, going forward, we'll be able to engage more effectively internationally as well.
Dr. Borio, what about the standards for clinical studies? Have they been up to par, especially given that we have so many different companies really racing to get that vaccine and treatments?
Yes, for the vaccines, the FDA has done a spectacular job. The professional staff that works in vaccines, they really understand the responsibility of their work. Vaccines are something that is given to healthy individuals to prevent a disease. This is a highly experienced staff. They've made very clear what the expectations are, and they really want strong evidence of safety and effectiveness in adequately controlled clinical studies. And also they want to make sure that the manufacturing processes are are high quality, that we have confidence in the way these vaccines are manufactured.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to announce today a new tiered system of alert levels, and Italy's government is working on tighter restrictions on social gatherings and sports. Matt was referencing some of the curfew restrictions in Germany a little bit earlier on, so this is a very much European story. Let's focus on part of the UK side here with Bloomberg opinion columnist Therese Raphael. Therese, good morning to you. So Boris Johnson's new coronavirus lockdown measures, they're being announced today. There's been a lot of backlash from various parts, from within his party, from opposition. It does seem as if this might go to a vote in the Commons, which could be interesting, in particular for the numbers to make sense, interesting as to whether the opposition will go along with this, if there's enough fiscal support, or, furlough-like support for those people who can't work.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a new phase, not just in the virus. We keep talking about a second wave, but in the way the government has to handle things. So in the first wave of the virus, when it emerged in March, April, the government simply announced its measures. It held press conferences, and that's just no longer enough to maintain public support, business support. So now we're seeing the government having to negotiate with local leaders, the mayors of Liverpool, Manchester, but also with Parliament, because Parliament has pushed back so forcefully on the idea that measures are taken without parliamentary scrutiny and votes. So now we're going to see Boris Johnson having to go to Parliament with his measures, having to show his workings as he has been asked to do, show the evidentiary base. I think that's one of the things where we can expect today is more government disclosure about what evidence it's using, particularly in the hospitality industry. From Labor's perspective, they have always said, Keir Starmer, the Labor leader, has always said he will support the government measures. He doesn't believe that that the party should politicize questions about dealing with the virus. At the same time, they are very aware that there is huge displeasure in the North, especially with the closing down of the hospitality sector, which is so important to the economy. So they will seek to make demands. I think Labor in the end would support a government measure, but we have conservative MPs from the North who are very unhappy, and other conservatives who have been rallying around Rishi Sunak, who are trying to press the government on why it's taken these measures, but also the manner it's taken these measures. So all of that now is going to be more debated in Parliament than previous measures ever were.
Kathleen, so where are we in this never-ending saga?
never-ending saga is right, isn't it? The stimulus soap opera of the last month, and of course it started out with Republicans saying they would never agree to any more stimulus, more than $1 trillion. The Democrats starting up around $3.5 trillion. So they have made progress, but not progress enough. And President Trump, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, over the weekend, definitely playing the blame game, each saying, well, it's your fault. It's your fault. Trump was on Fox News saying Republicans are having, quote, a hard time with Nancy Pelosi. Now, of course, they feel they've upped their ante, upped the amount they're willing to offer so many times. Nancy Pelosi keeps drawing a line and saying it is not enough. You just don't understand. Trump also said, we want to do this stimulus. We especially want to help airlines that are having such trouble. We want to help restaurants. We want to help hotels. Nancy Pelosi, for her part, put out a statement where she said the White House's offer on dealing with the health impact of the virus is grossly inadequate. In fact, she thinks around $45 billion or more is needed for that. In fact, she said their plan is, quote, a deadly failure. She says, until it's resolved, we remain at an impasse. Now, Larry Kudlow, who is the White House chief economic advisor, actually said he thinks that Pelosi and Mnuchin will have more talks. The Treasury Secretary, he thinks Mnuchin will boost the White House's offer, which is already up to 1.6. Trump's even talked about 1.8 trillion. And Steve Mnuchin and the White House Chief of Staff Meadows are calling for the unused funds from the Paycheck Protection Program to be used to help small businesses.
Kathleen, meanwhile, another top Federal Reserve official says more fiscal aid is really vital to the economic recovery.
Absolutely. Neil Kashkari, president of Minneapolis Fed, who has been very dovish on what the Federal Reserve needs to do in terms of boosting the economy, not hiking inflation until inflation is well moving higher, says it's vital for elected leaders to do something more. Here's what he said on CBS's Face the Nation Sunday show. We're going to continue to see a grinding, very slow recovery with thousands of small businesses around the country going bankrupt. That's why it's so vital that our elected leaders come together to take more action. What's going to get them to get together? What's going to get them to finally agree? Bloomberg Economics is arguing, and I think others might agree, that because the economic data in the U.S. the last couple of weeks have looked a little bit better, as Rob Kaplan, president of Dallas Fed, noted on our shows just last week, but the data coming out this week, if they continue to show weakness, maybe add a little more push to that. We're going to get retail sales. How's the consumer doing? Consumer prices. The Fed's concerned about wanting to move higher. And jobless claims on Thursday. How many people are still filing for new jobs? How many people remain unemployed? Is that the push that Congress, that the White House, that everybody needs to finally take this big step?
How do the candidates and their staff like you go back and forth with the debate condition? Are you the boss, or is the debate commission the boss?
Yeah, it's a really hard answer because nobody's the boss. The commission sets up a bunch of rules. They pick a bunch of sites. Then they sit down with the nominees of the party. They do this years in advance. And then they sit down with the nominees of the party and they start negotiating. And out of that negotiation comes some version of that schedule and those rules. Some of those negotiations are directly between the two candidates. We had Lindsey Graham as our negotiator, and Rahm Emanuel was the negotiator for Barack Obama. And we actually got so frustrated with the debate commission, we decided we were just going to do the debates ourselves. Then we realized the logistics on that was too much, and we went back to the commission. But the rules the commission put together are meant to be standardized, and that you then create a memorandum of understanding.
Okay, but Rick, that's brilliantly explained. Huge public value. It's not a standardized time. Is the president, what's his power here as president, as candidate, and with his visibility, obviously, and his vocal treatment? What's his ability to change the commission or make a more malleable process to get to his outcome?
Yeah, you can always say no, and that's what the president's saying this morning. I would say, though, the debate commission would never have announced that they did agree on a virtual debate unless somebody in the Trump campaign had said yes to that. So this is another example of Donald Trump not being connected to the leadership of his campaign and now going rogue on the debate commission and probably the Biden campaign, because the Biden campaign would have signed off on this format too. I would say we tried this in the primaries in 2000 when I ran John McCain's campaign against George W. Bush. And we didn't want to do a debate because of logistics. It was on the other side of the country, and we were trying to campaign to win. And the pressure on us to participate in that debate forced us to do a virtual debate where the two of us were on different sides of the country. And for my purposes, that was a disaster. But
yeah.
Virtual
Rick,
debate
just to jump in, just some response from the campaign that I want to bring to our audience very quickly. They will pass on the sad excuse for a debate. The campaign will hold a rally instead of that remote debate. So it looks like the president and the campaign on the same page here, Rick. I just wonder, from your perspective, with this poll just coming in from Fox News, with Biden having a 53-43 lead nationally, where do you see the polls right now? Because I read the polls out this morning. I've gone through the numbers multiple times, and Tom just curls up into a ball thinking about 4 years ago. What are they worth right now? Rick, how do you read the polls?
Yeah, so first of all, you got to understand, polls are a static picture. They're not dynamic. They don't take people's opinions over time. They take them in one instance. So they're only accurate that day. In a campaign that's moving around, like 4 years ago, where you had all these massive black swan events in October, you know, whether it was the Hollywood video or Comey reopening the investigation of Hillary, the polls don't take that into consideration. They only give you a snapshot. So what we know today is that Biden has some momentum, some movement toward him since the last debate, including the period of time that the president contracted COVID. And it looks like some of that movement is in a new voter group, not just suburban women, but white males. And that is a signal to Trump that he may have a problem with his base.
Rick, how much momentum did Mike Pence give to the Trump campaign last night?
You know, I think that he stabilized the Trump campaign. I mean, think about what's happened in 1 week. The Trump debate was a disaster a week ago for Donald Trump. He almost immediately contracted COVID, and then he blew up his own negotiations over the stimulus. That's 1 week. That's an amazing amount of activity. And so I think last night what Mike Pence did was something that the campaign hasn't been able to do before with the candidate, and that is stabilize the debate. His set of facts, his diagram of where the country is headed is exactly what the Trump campaign has been selling, and he did a good job delivering that.
He did a very confident job. Just to wrap things up, Rick, very quickly, we had the former New York mayor, Rudy Giuliani, on the program yesterday, and without much prompting or encouragement, he came out swinging. What we see today is the campaign coming out swinging against the debate commission. This is that classic siege mentality in the final few weeks of the campaign. Everyone's against us. Is this a strategy that's going to work, Rick? Is it working?
Well, you know, the bunker is a very nasty place to have to occupy, and that's where the Trump campaign is right now. Not only is their top leadership out with COVID, but the polls are turning against them. I would say the one thing that sort of defies that is the nimbleness or lack thereof of Donald Trump's addressing the stimulus negotiations. He's flip-flopped now 3 times in 3 days. There's no question that Congress wants a stimulus. They know what the public needs and what the Fed is requiring. And so I think that the decision-making at the top has always been Donald Trump. There's no campaign that's going to get in his way. He's running the bus, and the bus is veering all over the road, and that does not help him collect the votes he needs for Election Day.
"26 days out from the election, what do the polls tell us, Kaylee?"
The polls tell us that Biden's lead is widening. Granted, if 2016 was any lesson, we can't 100% take what the polls are saying for what will actually happen come Election Day. But the Real Clear Politics national average puts Joe Biden ahead by 9.7 points. That's nationally. And then when you look specifically at several key swing states, Quinnipiac University put out a poll just before the debate that showed Biden leading in a number of them. Florida up by 11 points, Pennsylvania up by 13, and also leading in Ohio. And of course, Francine, those all key states when it comes to the Electoral College, which Biden would have to win in order to get the presidency, secure those 270 votes. And 538, which is a poll aggregator, says right now the odds of Biden winning the Electoral College are up to near 83%. So we'll see if that changes in the next 26 days. We'll see how that can change next week if indeed we do get a presidential debate, the second one. But of course, a lot of that depends on the trajectory of the president's own COVID case, Francine.
Kayleigh, what could happen in the next 26 days? A lot of people already have cast their vote through mail-in. Right. A lot of people, have decided who they'll vote for. So, what will the 26 days left bring? Is it going to be more clashes? Is it personality? President Trump being pretty combative even whilst he's fighting COVID.
Well, it's a very fair question, Francine. A lot of ballots have already been cast, and it's not clear whether or not there's a lot of minds left to change at this point. But what could change in the next 26 days is that the president will be returning at some point to the campaign trail. He's, of course, been off the trail since October 1st when he got that positive COVID-19 diagnosis. Is he able to get back to those rallies, really build up a lot of momentum with his base, with his supporters? That could make a difference. And of course, we've gotten one October surprise in terms of that positive COVID diagnosis from the president, but there could always be another one. 26 days isn't all that long, but in politics, it's quite a long time, Francine.
Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president, and I'm standing in front of the Oval Office at the White House, which is always an exciting place to be. I got back a day ago from Walter Reed Medical Center. I spent 4 days there and didn't have to. I could have stayed at the White House, but the doctor said, because you're president, let's do it. I said, fine. You tell me what to do, and I'm going to listen. These are great professionals. They've done a fantastic job. And by the way, not only at Walter Reed, all over the country, we have the greatest doctors in the world. We have the greatest nurses, the greatest first responders, law enforcement, by the way. Incredible. Firefighters, everybody. They're just great. We have great people. This is a great country. But I spent 4 days there, and I went in, I wasn't feeling so hot, and within a very short period of time, they gave me Regeneron. It's called Regeneron, and other things too, but I think this was the key. But they gave me Regeneron, and it was like unbelievable. I felt good immediately. I felt as good 3 days ago as I do now. So I just want to say we have Regeneron. We have a very similar drug from Eli Lilly, and they're coming out, and we're trying to get them on an emergency basis. We've authorized it. I've authorized it. And if you're in the hospital and you're feeling really bad, I think we're going to work it so that you get them, and you're going to get them free. And especially if you're a senior, we're going to get you in there quick. We have hundreds of thousands of doses that are just about ready. I have emergency use authorization all set, and we got to get it signed now, and you're going to get better. You're going to get better really fast. This is things that nobody even thought of a few months ago. The job that the scientists, the labs, everybody have done is incredible. Then in addition to that, you have various other drugs that help a lot, but these, I view these, I know they call them therapeutic, but to me it wasn't therapeutic. It just made me better, okay? I call that a cure. So I want to get these things done. So we have to get them done. We have to get them approved. I want to get them to the hospitals where people are feeling badly. That's much more important to me than the vaccine. But on the vaccines, we have many companies that are in final stages for the vaccines. Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, all great companies, but many of them. And we're going to have a great vaccine very, very shortly. I think we should have it before the election, but frankly, the politics gets involved, and that's okay. They want to play their games. It's going to be right after the election. But we did it, nobody else. Nobody else would have been able to do it. The FDA has acted as quickly as they've ever acted in history. There's never been a time, and no president's ever pushed them like I pushed them either, to be honest with you. But the FDA is approving things in a matter of weeks that used to take a matter of years. So we have these drugs, Eli Lilly and the others that are so good, but they are, in my opinion, remember this, they're going to say that they're therapeutic, and I guess they are therapeutic. Some people don't know how to define therapeutic. I view it different. It's a cure. For me, I walked in, I didn't feel good. A short 24 hours later, I was feeling great. I wanted to get out of the hospital. And that's what I want for everybody. I want everybody to be given the same treatment as your president, because I feel great. I feel like perfect. So I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise. I caught it. I heard about this drug. I said, let me take it. It was my suggestion. I said, let me take it. And it was incredible the way it worked. Incredible. And I think if I didn't catch it, we'd be looking at that like a number of other drugs. But it really did a fantastic job. I want to get for you what I got, and I'm going to make it free. You're not going to pay for it. It wasn't your fault that this happened. It was China's fault. And China's going to pay a big price, what they've done to this country. China's going to pay a big price, what they've done to the world. This was China's fault. And just remember that. So we're going to get you the drug. It's going to be free. We're going to get it into the hospitals as soon as you can, as soon as we can. And you'll see some amazing things happen because we have our military is doing the distribution. It's called logistics. And they deliver hundreds of thousands of troops in a matter of days. This is easy stuff for them. Our general's all ready. We're waiting for the emergency use authorization. And the drug companies have just made a lot of it. So hopefully this is going to be not just a therapeutic, it's going to be much more than a therapeutic. You're going to get better, you're going to get better fast, just like I did. So again, a blessing in disguise. Good luck.
Professor Sharfstein, Francine wants to talk about her local pub and how she has to leave it, I believe, at 9:30, unlike her usual 1 a.m. But I've got to talk about the medicine of the weekend, which is this idea of immunity.
Okay, that was it for today. Hope you enjoy it. See you next time on the next live trading. Have a nice day and safe trading. Bye bye.